Next up, we have got the Shaggs with Philosophy of the World. On Friday, got an 8.6 BNR in a review by Quinn Moreland. More background. Originally, this got released in 1969. The Shaggs were an all-female garage rock band composed of teenage sisters Dot, Betty, Helen, and Rachel Wiggin. Their story, bit of an odd one. Their father, Austin Wiggins, when he was young, his mother predicted during a palm reading that he would marry a strawberry blonde woman, that he would have 2 sons after she died, and that his daughters would form a popular music group. After those first 2 predictions came true, Austin withdrew his daughters from school, bought them cheap pawn shop type instruments, and forced them to rehearse hours and hours every day and perform weekly at the local nursing home. In 1969, Austin spent most of his savings taking them to a studio, and we got Philosophy of the World out of that. The rigorous practice doesn't really appear to have paid off because they have basically no sense of timing, key, or really how to play instruments at all. But there's like a sort of innocence in their songwriting in combination with their extreme amateurism that's turned this into a classic of outsider art. People like Frank Zappa, Kurt Cobain expressed admiration of the group. And just if you don't know, outsider art is the label used to describe art created like outside the boundaries of official culture. Artists usually self-taught, no contact with the mainstream world. But Austin Wiggin, he died in 1975, and the sisters, who clearly had no interest in music, immediately disbanded and just continued on with their normal lives. So have you guys ever heard of the Shaggs before?
I had not. I can't believe this got past me. I mean, with a story like that, you know, I love a good story
Yeah.
on an album where you're just talking about Big Star, but I literally never heard of this at all.
It's not even that interesting of a story, but I actually had listened to the Shaggs back in 2010. I did a little digging into my Last FM because I recognized the name and the album cover, and it turned out that I had listened to it a total of 3 times, 3 tracks.
Well, you made it real far. I love the Shaggs. I am a sucker for outsider art, and I'm a sucker for things that are just fucking weird, and that is what the Shaggs are. It really surprised me, Gabe, that you had never heard of these this group. I really thought you would have been all over them. But go ahead and do your best to describe the sound of this record.
Yeah, so I mean, you said it. They are really bad at playing their instruments. I mean, it must be heard to be believed. You heard a snippet just a minute ago, which hopefully gave you a little taste. But it's like I don't know. Even people who are not good at music have like some sense of melody. It's like the melodies here are so bizarre. I mean, so bizarre. It's like who would write a melody like this? And of course, like they're very amateur, so it's like the vocal line just matches the guitar like riff exactly, you know, just kind of the thing you do like first when you start to try to write a song when you're very young or whatever. But the riffs like are not catchy whatsoever. The drums are like off time. You know, it's got a garage rock sound, but and the vocals are like trying to be like sort of a sunshiny pop of like the late 60s, but they are really like nasally and extremely creepy, like the twins from The Shining kind of creepy.
Right. So like, I mean, you describe it as bizarre, almost like you're complimenting it, but like there was no intention of trying to be bizarre. I mean, they were trying to sound like they were trying to emulate these 60s pop musicians.
Yeah, well, that's the thing with like outsider art. None of these people are like trying to be weird. They just like fail at what they're trying to do. Not always fail.
But your description says that they like what they don't. They like have no idea like what the boundaries are or how they're supposed to perform art. But these girls did though, right?
And that's a good point because Pitchfork actually in their like review of it tries to argue that the Shaggs are not outsider art because they knew of 60s rock music, and there's some sort of argument that they may or may not have ever had music lessons. I think they probably didn't, and if they did,
safe bet.
They should probably get their money back. But it's impossible to not have any contact at all with like the mainstream. You know, the most famous outsider artist, probably Henry Darger, and you know his shit's nuts, but he is aware. I'm sure he knew of Picasso and stuff. It's not like he was so insulated, and so I really took issue with Pitchfork's argument about that. It's just when you just make something that's so far outside the bounds,
wait a second,
they don't even know, because they can't even like realize that it's so bad. You know, anyone else?
Oh, I'm sure they did. That's why they quit.
I mean, they may have, but their dad pushing them forward, which I think is an important part of it.
That's what's weird. It's like the dad is the outsider artist.
Yeah,
really.
And yeah, really.
He seems insane, absolutely insane. And you know, most outsider artists have like some sort of mental issue, disability. That's kind of part of it. And the idea is that like you want to get to like people like outsider art because it gets us to some sort of pure place. Like, oh, you know, this person has like limited contact with you know the outside world or like culture at large, and so they're just like coming from something, like they're just doing something. They're not like, you know, going to art school. They're not reacting to Picasso or whatever. Like they're just doing from sort of this pure innocent place that most people aren't really afforded the possibility to do. But you know, and I think that's fascinating, but I don't think it has to be like completely shut off like you were saying, Dan. You know, another like really famous outsider artist, and of course this is debatable, but you know, somebody like Captain Beefheart has the outsider artist appeal, and it's because you don't get the sense that he's making Trout Mask Replica to be weird. Like he thinks it sounds good.
Yeah, exactly. That's
right.
The thing.
Okay.
Not trying to be weird, just like being normal to yourself, but it being nuts. Captain Beefheart's a good example of that. Frank Zappa to some extent, and I think that's why, you know, he loved this album.
I mean, I definitely agree with what you said about Captain Beefheart, but the biggest difference between Captain Beefheart and the Shaggs is that Captain Beefheart knew what he was doing. The Shaggs are trying to emulate 60s pop music, and they are terrible at it. So I don't understand why you can read all of this extra...
Well, I mean, Captain Beefheart just happened to be a good musician. I mean, if you look at outsider art, there's some beautiful paintings, you know, as good as anything you've ever seen, and then there's some stuff that looks like, you know, a kindergartner drew it, and one's not necessarily better than the other. It's all about the context and the, you know, the really, honestly, the story behind it is like super. That's kind of a theme of this episode, but the story about it is like very important. If this was just a band who was like, let's be super weird and try to play wrong, this would be stupid. This would be a dumb album. No one would care. Yeah. But it's not.
How do you not think, Darren, that this is an interesting story? I mean, it's like, it's incredible to me that, I mean, it's basically child abuse, right? I mean, we were talking about this off air, Dan, but it's like, hard to say exactly what the situation was. I mean, the daughters have said like it's no big deal, or we just had a weird dad or whatever, but you know, it sounds very abusive to pull them out of school and like force them to practice. Now the theory is that, and what they've kind of said is that they would skip practice routinely, which I think shows on this album for sure. But you know, so it's not like they were chained to their, you know, guitar or whatever, but it's a mentally unstable person, their father, for sure.
And definitely.
They're in a dark. I mean, the Pitchfork review I think is fascinating because like they're in a very abusive situation, and you know the song about parents, who are parents, right? It's like this ode to how we think parents are mean because they tell us things to do, but they just love us and they care for us, and it's like you've got these extremely mentally, at least, abused kids, and you know, they're singing like this song about how great parents are. Like there's something very, very unsettling about that, and you can't get that anywhere but like an outsider art piece but this.
I've always felt like Who Are Parents was like written by their dad, you know. All the songs are credited to Dot, but
it's even creepier if he's like
exactly.
Okay, what is creepier, if he wrote it and forced him to play it, or if they wrote it like hoping that if
they're
he
so
liked
brainwashed,
he wouldn't beat the shit out of them. Yeah, or they're totally brainwashed.
Yeah, honestly, yeah, that's a good point. I never really thought of it that way. But yeah, they're both pretty awful, honestly. I just always kind of pictured him like in the corner, like, play that one. That's a good one.
I love that one.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that I just feel like even in the Pitchfork article, I feel like you guys are just reading so much. You're trying to apply all this additional meaning and story behind this very basic story. Like, yeah, I get it. It's kind of weird that this dad did that, but like, I don't know. There's just not enough there, like factual evidence to really lead me to believe that this was like a really messed up situation.
Yeah, well, I mean, even if you get rid of all that, I'm just gonna.
Darren's like, I chain my kids to.
There's no, but okay, there's no chaining. They weren't like bound to anything. He didn't beat them. There's no evidence of that. There's nothing that I've read that said like, oh yeah,
there's emotional abuse, right?
Yeah, definitely.
How is there emotional abuse?
How is pulling your kids out of school to force them to be in a
the 60s,
rock band?
That's not that. I mean, kids were being pulled out of school all the time to like work and do all this kind of crap for the family. I mean, that's just...
I think Darren's confused with like the 1860s.
No, I just don't.
People were pulling them out to farm all the time. They needed another hand on the cotton fields. That's ridiculous to not think there's something weird going on with this. Would you pull your children out of school to make them form a rock band, especially after you heard them play a couple times and they were this bad?
And you're trying to fulfill your like dead mother's
palm reading. Yeah.
Yes, I get that. That part is like weird, but I don't really find it all that endearing or fascinating. That makes me like love this album.
Let me ask you, like, maybe this is, this is probably like off the point, but like, if you watch like an interview with somebody or whatever, and they're like, this is the last interview they gave before, like moments later they were murdered, right? And they're talking about like, I don't know, it's a politician talking about like rising oil prices or something. There's something really interesting and creepy and unsettling about watching that otherwise very mundane thing because of like
the context. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I mean, you don't think that's valid at all, Darren?
How does that apply to this story though?
It seems like you're saying like the music just sucks and the story is like weird, but why would I listen to something that sucks?
No, the story is weird, but I don't feel like it elevates the weirdness of the music. Like the only thing I could say about the music is like, gee, I guess it's charming that they tried, but it's so terrible, it's so bad that, and there's no, to me, there's not enough story there. Like when we talked about Big Star, like we could have gone on for another hour probably just trying to like break down what the lead singer was like going through, mentally and stuff. Here, you only have like a few paragraphs worth of stuff.
Because the Shaggs weren't famous until Frank Zappa played it on Dr. Demento's radio show. So just no one knew. And actually, like Dot has been like around when Neutral Milk Hotel first came back. She opened for a few of their shows and stuff. But even if you get rid of the story and everything, the record is still like an interesting listen. The way the drums are just so off, they become like it becomes like some free jazz like nutso thing. Like she's doing it on accident, but it almost like morphs into like some sort of like nuts like polyrhythm like super complex thing.
Yeah, but you're, oh my god, you're interpreting it that way, but that was never her intention.
No, but doesn't matter.
Free jazz artists are actually good at what they do.
And I agree with that, but just if somebody makes something and they didn't mean to make something great, it could still be great,
My problem is that if you don't have like some sort of boundary, and I know you're going to say, well, it's outsider art, but if you don't have some sort of boundary, then anything goes. Like anybody could just go out there and record some bizarre, weird ass album of them just like tapping on a tree. And you'd be like, well,
Well, that's not interesting. But yeah, anyone. That's what's great about like outsider art is like and folk art in general is like anyone can do it. It doesn't need you don't have to go to Juilliard and study music. Like anyone can like create something like this. And I mean the music and then the lyrics get like they're just so strangely like happy and like stuff over when you know the story and everything, especially like some of them like My Pal Foot they kind of like insinuate that like the cat is like dead or like fell off a cliff at the end of that song.
It's like a darkness.
It's like very like kind of creepy if you like listen to it and you like pay attention to the story. I just don't get how you don't find stuff like that pretty crazy.
What I would say is like I guess there are two things going on right now, but one is that, this is, I gotta say, much more listenable than a lot of other outsider music. You know what I mean, Dan? Like,
yeah, for sure.
Was that one guy that just plays like the demo song on a keyboard and like shouts about
Wesley Willis? Yeah,
yeah. Darren would not be having that. I mean,
no.
So yeah, there's some stuff that it's not really for listening. I will say that the story of this is fascinating and makes it like an interesting sort of document. And I would understand if somebody was like, yeah, that's kind of interesting, but it's not really that fun to listen to. I do think it's kind of fun to listen to. I think there are qualities, the things that Dan's been talking about that are like really unsettling, like sort of that weird darkness to like the song My Pal Foot or Who Are Parents or whatever, that is really fascinating. And just like, the offness of it is so disorienting. One thing that I noticed is like, I don't know. Darren seems soulless to me because he doesn't care at all about these poor girls. But like, I was like, I didn't even want to listen to it for the first time at night because I thought it was going to give me nightmares. And it does creep me out. But the first listen is so fun because it's like shocking, and it reminded me of like the first time I put on Trout Mask Replica. And now that album sounds like normal to me. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And after just a week of listening to the Shaggs, it's like, yeah, this is cool. This is fun. Like I just put it on and I'm like, cleaning around the house or whatever. But that first time was genuinely shocking to me. I mean, I guess, I don't know, Darren, did you feel that shock at least?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I listened to it several times. I was never like, this wasn't really an album that I was just like, God, I can't wait till this is over. It's just that it was never really like that endearing to me. The songs were what they were. I wasn't anxious to like turn it off. It's not like I only listened to the album once. I was like, I'm never listening to that again. It's not like I'm ready to delete it from the iPod either. Cause like, I there's something about it's now like sort of like historically important in a way because of like people like Frank Zappa and like sort of how their story has come along. So I find that part like somewhat interesting, but overall, do you guys remember William Hung from American Idol? You remember that Asian guy?
Yeah.
This is William Hung happening in the 60s, is it not?
It's funny you say that, Darren. It's funny you say that because if you look at the Wikipedia page of Outsider Art, William Hung is on there. I'm not kidding. Because that is the same thing, and you're exactly fucking right. And it's fascinating. And in 100 years, William Hung will be such a fascinating document.
And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to like all outsider art to like some of it, I'll give you, this is not an album you're going to just pop on all the time. You're going to drive around in your car listening to. It's not really like for that. It's for, I don't know. It's just like, it's like a piece of art in a sense.
Yeah. If we want to talk about the score, was it an 8.6 BNR? I like that score. I think, it deserves the BNR because it's something like I think you just got to hear. It's absolutely fascinating to me. I understand if it's not, if it's something you check out once and that's enough for you, but there are things that I genuinely really like about it. I mean, the same way that I feel about like a lot of outsider art, which is, it's a different experience than like normal art, let's say, with air quotes. It's a different thing. It's not really about like the actual quality of it, but you bring in that story and stuff, and it's endlessly fascinating to me. So I like it. What do you guys think?
I want to hear Darren before I go.
I just want to remind you, Gabe, just real quick, 8.6, right? That's the same score that Radiohead's Hail to the Thief got. And actually, the King of Limbs received an even lower score, 7.9. So you're sitting here saying that these Shaggs, these three ladies here have more talent than Radiohead.
I don't think I don't think the rating is like this much talent. 8.6 talents.
No. Okay, all right. Here's my take. I actually agree with the BNR because I think it should be heard. Look, if you are interested in music, if you want to appear as a patrician to all of your friends, then you better have this one under your belt. You know what I mean? But an 8.6 is like bizarre. I would never give it such a high rating. I really wouldn't. I would encourage people to hear it and to understand it, learn about it. It's definitely interesting to find out kind of how they suddenly became, a cult, or earned a cult following, things like Frank Zappa, Kurt Cobain listing it as the number 5 favorite best album of all time. Very interesting, obviously. I cannot give it. I think about Dan's scale about whether this makes the world a worse place, and I really do think it makes the world, a worse place. But people should certainly hear it. I'd give it a 3. I really would. A 3.
God, no soul. Maybe the child abuse aspect of it makes the world a worse place. I'll agree with you there. But if we pretend that there's no child abuse, maybe they were, perfectly happy to do it. I think this is an incredibly interesting and I'll even say important piece of outsider art. And it shocks me, Darren. You're a bit of a Kurt Cobain stan. You would think you would like this a little more, but I think this is without a doubt a 10. A 10. It's just a great piece of outsider art. It's not gonna be the best album you've ever heard. It's not. You're just looking at it in the wrong way, Darren. This isn't. You don't approach it from the way what you're talking about with Radiohead. Don't approach it in this is an album that I'm going to listen to and necessarily enjoy. It's a piece of art, like I said, Darger, his paintings aren't the greatest and stuff, but when the story behind it, this giant book he's written, and just him being nuts holed up in his room, it makes them great. It needs the story, and this is one of those things, and it's incredibly important and should be heard by all.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, that it's a classic of outsider art. And, I just would say, we're moving on now, but, I think that outsider art, that quality, maybe this is sort of pure outsider art, but that quality, the outsider art quality is important to a lot of music that we love, the whole Elephant Six scene is where is this coming from? Who are these people? Thinking that they are psychedelic 60s, experimental musicians, in this weird, college town in the middle of bumfuck Georgia. There's qualities to the music we love that's holy crap, who are these people? What is this world that they've invented? And that's a lot of fun.